9 concerning the state finances. Is there any objection? Seeing none, we'll introduce that. Also like to introduce RS 0182. Has to do with rural law forgiveness from the Supreme Court. And without objection, any objection, we'll accept that. If anyone has any bills that they'd like to introduce, I'd like to have you let me know ahead of time, and so I know what they are before we introduce them. So thank you. Next, we'll start out with a briefing by the staff on the House Appropriations Committee budgeting actions. Dylan Deere, Kansas Legislative Research. Dylan, welcome committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that introduction. Last week, I gave you a voluminous document that described all of the agency requested items. And today, I think we're going to just work from a shorthand. So you should have one page in front of you. It's about 8 pages. And I was going to touch on the major adjustments which House Appropriations has passed through the Appropriations Committee so far. So if we want to go ahead and start on page 1, Attorney General is the first item in fiscal year 2025. They deleted $248,322 of SGF for the VINE system. That's a victim identification and notification system. Historically, that had been funded from federal funds, and so the House Appropriations Committee expressed some concerns about funding it from replacing SGF with federal funds, and so they deleted that item. That's the only other item of like major importance on page 1. If you want to turn to page 2. So we have some other fee fund adjustments on page 2, barbering and cosmetology. About the middle of the page, you see Board of Indigent Defense Services, FY 2025. They added $4 million SGF in reappropriations in FY 2025, so the total amount of reappropriations lapses totals $3 million. They had roughly $7 million in reappropriations, so it was a partial restoration of the bids amount. This was the amount to fund the assigned counsel caseloads for the Board of Indigent Defense Services, and also to cover some of their expert witness fees inside of them. They have not fully funded the amount for caseloads for assigned counsel in FY 2026 at this point. Of course, they can always revisit that issue. Turning to page 3. I didn't identify anything on page 3 at this point that needed to be identified. They did on judicial branch in FY 26, delete 385,059 to not adopt a 5% increase in salaries and wages for court reporters. So they did not adopt that adjustment. Turning to page 4. So on the legislature's budget for fiscal year 2025, they did add $3 million SGF to reduce the size of the reappropriations lapse. The entire amount of the operational cost, not the K-Lowest portion of the legislature's budget, was lapsed, and this added $3 million of that back, so just sort of reducing the size of that amount of the legislative lapse. Under OITS, in the middle, you have add $2 million SGF to the agency's IT emergency account. I believe this was in a GovRec item as well. Under Secretary of State, there was 2 adjustments that were made. The House Appropriations Committee added $1.5 million to the Technology Communications Fee Fund to modernize the state regulation making process by implementing an electronic regulation system. They are having some conversations about that fee fund and whether or not it can be used for that specific purpose, but I think that's still being investigated, and we defer to the revisor's office on their opinion on these matters. They also, in item 2, added $200,000 SGF to meet the 20% state match for the HAVA election security grant. So that'll draw down an additional $1 million in federal funds. These HAVA funds go out by the Secretary of State to do modernization of election into the various counties. So they go out as grants to the counties for that. Go to page 5. We'll start with Lawrence State Hospital. they added $695,526 SGF to restore the reappropriations and $827,628 to restore reappropriations for the sexual predator program. So those are the two reappropriations that were lapsed at the recommendation of LBC that were being, I think, at least partially restored. They also added 30 million SGF in 25 for contract nursing as well. On the Osawatomie State Hospital, they added $8 million in each of FY25 and FY26 for contract nursing at that hospital at Osawatomie. On education, there's a bunch of little small adjustments. The only thing of note on education, K-12 education that is on page 6. They added $30 million SGF for the special education state aid for FY 2026. So I think this was also in the governor's recommendation for that $30 million. And you see that they also added that $30 million SGF for special education state aid in FY 2027. Under Historical Society, they added $905,000 SGF for interior wall infrastructure at the Kansas Museum of History in FY 2025. I think this is an unanticipated cost when they were doing the renovations. There's some like SIBF type adjustments on the bottom of page 6, but not a big deal. Turning to page 7. Let's go all the way down to public safety. So for the Adjutant General, they added $1.6 million in 25 and 19.6, including 2.3 million SGF in FY 2026. This was all disaster funding. And a portion of the FY 25 amount was from a lapsed reappropriation. So it was partially restoring those reappropriations. Turning to page 8. Under KBI, they added 3.1 million SGF for the Pittsburgh Lab debt service. This same item occurs in FY 2026. They're not deleting the debt service for the Pittsburgh the Pittsburgh Lab debt service. What they're doing is they're reconsolidating all of the debt service in the Department of Administration. So this has been a pretty common action by the state, is sort of moving all that debt service so it's centrally maintained and tracked. The other items for KBI, in item 3, you added $355,000 in 2 FTE positions for some new IT officers, added $500,000 SGF for some laboratory infrastructure. This is related to the Forensic Science Laboratory, and added $500,000 SGF to upgrade the state source system. So those were some other adjustments that were considered at the KBI. I would note that all of the budget summaries are now available on the KLRD website. I'll send you an email with a link to that. So if you have any questions about some of the detail behind these items, you can look at our budget summaries and review those. And we're working diligently at making you hard copies as well, so that you'll have some hard copies that you'll be able to review. I think we're doing the finalization and collation of that document now, so I anticipate it'll be available any day. If you look at the very bottom of page 8, so this is total adjustments. So for FY 2025, so far during deliberation on the budget, the House Appropriations Committee has added $46.3 million to their previous adjusted recommendation for FY 2025, and added $41.5 million to their adjustment to FY 2026. Of course, I think there was about a $307.9 million deletion from the agency request and a $1.1 billion deletion from the agency request in FY 25 and FY 26 respectively. And so these are just adjustments against that previous deletion as they consider adding some additional items back in. With that, I would stand for questions on House Appropriations Committee actions. Of course, this is always a moving target as they are downstairs making recommendations now.
Thank you, Dylan. First off, on the Larned Hospital, they added in the 30 million there, and Osawatomie 8 million. That's about half of what we spent last year. So what was their thoughts behind that?
Certainly, there was a lot of debate on contract nursing. With your permission, I would actually defer this question to Dayton LeMunyon to respond.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Dayton LeMunyon, Senior Fiscal Analyst with Legislative Research. I'll actually be giving a little intro in a couple of minutes after Dylan wraps up. So I'll give you a preview. The agency requested about $32 million for Larned for this year, and that represents their shortfall. So they have a certain amount that's inside of their base budget, so to speak. So they estimate their total cost will be maybe 42 million, around there, at Larned for 25. So they've requested $32 million to cover the difference between their base budget and their anticipated needs. The House Appropriations recommended $30 million of that instead of the 32 that they requested. But the appropriations also restored their reappropriations, which is 1.5 million, to get them pretty close to the ask of 32.
Tell me if I'm correct, but last year, between the two, it was around 70 million?
So last year, so fiscal year 2024, it was 41.3 million for Larned and 18 million for Osawatomie, so 59 million, around there. So yeah, it's pretty similar. And if you look in your packet, probably the next item is a chart that shows those expenditures over the years.
Okay, thank you. One other question on the, this will be for Dylan. I can't find, I marked it, but well, other questions? Senator Petty.
So, Darlene, you mentioned that we're going to have some access to see what they've deleted from the requested, besides just having this overall number here at the back on page 8.
So that was included in the big document that I distributed last week. So every deletion was in there. But this morning in House Appropriations, I distributed this document, which is every adjustment that the Legislative Budget Committee made. So if this committee would like that, a copy of that same document, I can do that.
Great. I do have. So under the Attorney General, you mentioned that at this point in time, they've deleted the 248,000 plus for the Vine system. Was that being paid through VOCA funds? How was that?
So that was one of the sources of funding. So of course, the VOCA fund balance is in the federal government is falling pretty dramatically, which is resulting in some reductions to child advocacy centers, domestic violence prevention grants, some other additional grants as well. That's because the cap on those VOCA funds, and I don't want to get too deep into it, was basically removed, which allowed a pretty substantial expansion of that funding. But now the balance is falling down. And so you're seeing the reductions in the amount of federal funding coming from that source. I think there were also some other federal fund sources. I think there was a KDHE grant that was used for Vine system funding as well, but that I've been told that's not available. So this was the request from the Attorney General, was to fund it from SGF, and so far the House Appropriations Committee has said no. And
then under the judiciary, that deletion of the 385,000 for the court reporters. So have the court reporters not been included in those requests with the judiciary in the past, or is this?
The court reporters have not been excluded. This was a special targeted 5% adjustment for court reporters in order to be able to address some hiring issues they've had in that area. So they have not been excluded for previous salary adjustments.
This was an enhancement to help get court reporters, I would take.
That is correct. And there's the judicial branch budget does have salary adjustments for non-judicial personnel that are just your fringe benefit costs. It also has an enhancement for non-judicial personnel, and this would be an additional 5% just for court reporters on top of that amount.
I guess we'll be able to see that what kind of a shortage they have or how hard it is to get them. So
I'm sure they'll provide testimony.
And then you answered that question. Under the Kansas Bureau of Investigation on page 8, where you mentioned about the deleting of the 3 million, but that they were putting all of these debt service into the Department of Administration. So where can we see that, where that's being?
So the House Appropriations Committee has not yet adopted the Department of Administration budget yet. So once that budget goes to HAP, you'll see ads for $3.1 million in this document. Presumably. I mean, they haven't done it yet, so.
Okay, all right. You answered that question, then. Thank you.
Other questions? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to the Larned State Hospital so I understand that picture. If we take in 2024, how much did we actually spend for contract nurses out there?
Once again, it's just probably the best if I defer to Dayton on the questions regarding contract nursing, if that's all right.
Hayden?
Mr. Chair, Senator, the amount that I cited before, the 41.3 million, those were the actual expenditures last year. So for Larned, that was 41.3 million in fiscal year 24. And their total request for 25 was $43.8 million. So a slight increase there.
So how's this 30 million? Are we still short on that? Am I reading that right from what their actual? Is this going to cover what you need for for this year? That's my question.
So if you look at the next document in your packet, you should have a chart. And if you look at that second chart labeled Larned State Hospital, the orange line is the agency request, and the green line is the House recommendation. So they requested 43.8. The House has recommended 41.1. So there is a difference there of $2.7 million short of what the agency requested, with the caveat that the House did restore $1.5 million in reappropriations that could also be used for contract staff. So there is a gap there.
So what happens if we come up and don't have enough money to pay for contract nurses? That's my question. How do we cover this? What was the conversation on that?
Mr. Chair, Senator, I can't recall specifics in the conversation in the committee about what if it can't be funded. I would defer, not to kick the can further, I'd defer that to the agency when they make their presentation here shortly.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. Going back to, you mentioned this on page 4, Secretary of State, Mr. Deere, about the 1.5 million for the Technology Communication Fee Fund for the modernization program. It's my understanding that this is not just for the Secretary of State's office, but for all agencies, and therefore they want to request, Mr. Chair, at the appropriate time, looking at SGF funds, but I know that there are some potential issues with that. So I want to just ask, what are the issues and with not using the fee fund, but maybe SGF?
Mr. Chairman, certainly, and I'll have to be a little careful here that I don't step into the revisor's sort of territory, but they made the election in committee to fund this from this Technology Communications Fee Fund. It has a balance of roughly $5 million in that fee fund. It's used by statute to enforce some electronic signature acts and sort of implement some of those electronic signature acts. You could notwithstand that purpose and use it for other purposes. Of course, that does get you into the area of a question of fee sweeps, which there has been litigation about that in the past. The Secretary of State has requested that we fund this through the State General Fund. That was part of their original request.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you. And my other question is on the education on page 5, the 400,000 from federal funds. What FTEs are those? Do you know what those positions those are for?
My recollection is that is related to a longitudinal data analysis grant.
Okay. Thank you. My final question, how many of these agencies have submitted per state statute the priority-based budgeting reporting requirements? Do you know?
I mean, if it's not every single agency, it's pretty darn close. I think the only, we have something from the Office of the Governor. Yeah. So they are available on our website. And so agencies have been compliant with submitting performance-based budgeting.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. one of the questions, and you may have covered it and I may have missed it, and that was your FTEs are not totaled over here at the side under FTEs. You're just not counting, you're done running total on the FTEs. Is that correct? Right now?
That's correct, and it's a function of the report, and we'll take a look at that.
There's several of them that said they're adding FTEs, but
That's correct, but don't have any FTE in the number. And I don't know if it's a function in the sum or a function of a data entry issue. I should note that this is very much a draft report. We don't normally present this until we're all done completing the budget, and so we're providing you advanced copies in order so you can sort of track House Appropriations Committee action.
Other questions? Seeing none? Darlene, do you have
Chairman?
anything
With
else?
your permission? Yes, actually. So there is one other document. I told you I'd send you an email, so you have links to all of the budget summaries. We also have a description of every difference between the Gov rec, okay, and the current House Bill 2007 rec. And so we'll include that as part of that distribution as well. So you'll have a copy of those documents. So you, when you're deliberating on the budget, you can make the choice to adopt any one of those items into it. All right?
Thank you, Darlene. And the other paper that you said you had there, the
That's all the LBC deletions.
blue or whatever you want to call it, okay, but you'll share that with all of us.
I will.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Darlene. Next, we'll have a briefing on contract nursing at the state hospitals, and we'll start out with Dayton Lemunion, Kansas Legislative Research Department. Dayton, welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'll just give a brief introduction on the kind of budget for the contract staffing and what appropriations has done so far, and then I'll turn it over to the agency folks who are here with a presentation. So as I mentioned, your next document should be a chart that looks like this. It details contract nursing expenditures from 2019 to 2026 for the Osawatomie State Hospital and Larned State Hospital, which are the two state hospitals that primarily use the bulk of the contract staffing. You'll note around 2021, 2022, there was a large increase at both of the hospitals. And moving forward, I'll look at Osawatomie specifically first. If you look at 2024, the actual expenditures on contract staffing were $18 million. The agency's total request for 25 was $16 million and $17.6 million in fiscal year 2026. That represents an enhancement of $11 million because, as I noted, they do have some expenditures in the base budget. So they requested $11 million to cover a shortfall between what they're going to spend and what's in their base budget. The House Appropriations Committee recommended $8 million for fiscal year 2025 and 2026. So if you're looking at the chart, the gap between the green line and the orange line is the difference between the House Appropriations recommendation and the agency's request. Moving down to the next graph, Larned State Hospital, you'll see something similar. I will note that the agency's request was $32.7 million, not 30.2. I think I wrote this when I was getting late. So $32.7 million was their request for both years. House Appropriations recommended adding, as I noted, $30 million in fiscal year 2025 only, and did not add any additional funding for 2026. House Appropriations also added language for fiscal year 2027 to prohibit contract staffing at Larned State Hospital beginning in fiscal year 2027. I now stand for questions on that graph.
Thank you, Darlene, or Dayton. So explain this $11 million. 11.1, did both, or that's at Osawatomie. Is this money that they had in the SGF that was left over?
Mr. Chair, so if we think about the budget as a whole for contract staffing, they have, if you look at 2025, the total is $16 million that they're requesting. $11 million of that is an enhancement. So they have $5 million already in their approved base budget. You know, each year they have a base budget. So if there's $5 million in there. They're requesting the $11 million to make up the difference between that base amount and what they're projecting to spend on contract staff expenditures. Does that answer your question?
Yes, so they're needing another 11 million on top of the 18 million?
The 11 million would get to the total of $16 million.
So that's the total.
The figures in the graph represent the total amount.
That includes 11, and okay.
That's correct.
All right. Other questions? Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, I'm trying to get ahead of you, so I'll be, so this number here that we have it to 16 million and it goes to 18 million, it goes to 16 million. If I look at the actuals, or actually, let's go to the FTEs first. How many FTEs are included in it? How many contract are included in that?
Mr. Chair, Senator, the numbers in this table are all for contract staff.
Okay.
This doesn't reflect any salaries and wages, for example, for full-time employees of the hospital.
So, and you're probably not, this chart won't answer my question, but how many FTEs are authorized versus how many actuals we have?
Mr. Chair, Senator, I do have that over on my computer, so I'll get that to you while ks is up here presenting.
So one more question. So if that is the case, then the difference between that, is that where they got the $5 million? The actuals versus FTEs?
Mr. Chair, Senator, so no, they have their salaries and wages budget, and then they also have contractual services budget, and one of those objects that they can spend the contractual services budget on are contract staff. So there are different budgeted amounts.
Different budgets.
Yes, and I would note that often when an agency has vacancies, they'll reduce their salaries and wages, anticipated expenditures, anticipating that they'll have some of those vacancies. So they might have already reduced their budget, assuming for vacancies, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
The agencies are here. They're going to be here after Dayton. So any other questions for Dayton? Seeing none, thank you, Dayton. We'll move on to Scott Bruner, Deputy Secretary of Hospitals and Facilities at the Kansas Department of Aging Disability Services. Scott, welcome committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Scott Bruner. I'm the Deputy Secretary for KDADS for Hospitals and Facilities. That means my responsibility is overseeing all 4 of the state hospitals and working with the superintendents and the teams on each campus for their daily operations and long-term planning. I just wanted to set a little bit of context. You've asked a lot of really good questions already, and Dayton and Dylan have done a good job answering them. But just to give you a little more context about the hospitals, for those of you who haven't worked their budgets before or haven't heard from them before, and then turn it over to our 2 superintendents from each campus to give you a little more detail on what contract staffing means for the campus, how the operational impacts, and then some of the budget impacts as well. So we've got a slide deck for you that I'm going to go through, at least my part, relatively quickly so you can ask, well, so you can hear from the experts, but ask them questions as well. Like Dayton said, we're focusing this discussion on the 2 mental health hospitals that we have, one in Larned and one in Osawatomie. They are the primary users of contract labor across our 4 campuses. And they have similar purposes at kind of their core. Osawatomie and Larned are both state mental health hospitals, so they serve individuals who are adults in acute mental health crisis who are involuntarily committed, so the courts have ordered those individuals into treatment. That part of the campuses are fairly similar. Larned, in addition, has 2 other programs that operate on that campus, the Sexual Predator Treatment Program, which houses individuals who have completed their criminal sentence but then are civilly committed to ongoing care and treatment. and then the state security program, which is or otherwise known as the state security hospital. So that's the program that evaluates if a criminal defendant needs their competency evaluated or restored so they can stand trial, and then do some other evaluations for criminal defendants as well. So those are on the Larned campus. Partially to Senator Alley's question about staffing and overall capacity, here on slide 4, we tried to give you a little highlight of the budgeted bed capacity for each of the programs that operate on the campuses, and then what our average census fiscal year to date have been in each of those programs as well. So it's fairly straightforward, but I'll walk you through it. For Osawatomie and Adair Acute Care, those are the two programs that operate on the Osawatomie campus. They have a total budgeted bed capacity of 176. The difference between the two are when the Osawatomie State Hospital was decertified, part of the process to bring federal money back to the campus was to create a separate acute unit, and that's what Adair Acute Care is. But the purposes are fairly similar between the two programs. There's also a reintegration facility at Osawatomie for sexual predators who are working their way through the program and are at a phase where they can work in the community and live off the Larned campus. So you can see those numbers there. For Larned, then it's got the bed capacity for the psychiatric services program, which is the involuntary commitment program, state security for criminal defendants, and then sexual predator treatment program. And you can see the budgeted beds is a good reference point, but the average census will tell you how many patients we're actually serving on a daily basis. So in total, across the two campuses, about 560 individuals being treated. And then our staffing is there below for the three main programs, are a little over 1,400 positions in total. Again, for Senator Alley and the rest of the committee, that's our authorized position count. Our filled number is much lower than that, and we'll talk some more about that here in just a second. The other part that's relevant, again, to this discussion is kind of our turnover rate and our vacancy rate overall. So on slide 5, we gave you a little information about the turnover is important. Vacancy is probably the more operative factor. So about a third across those 1,430 positions, about a third of those are vacant on any given, well, this was for January 1, but that's a fairly typical number. So we're running about a third vacant, where the actual direct care to patients, nursing, are what we call mental health disability tech positions, licensed practical nurses, those positions, the vacancy rate's closer to 50 to 60%, depending on the campus. Again, we'll talk, the superintendents can talk more about how vacancy rate interacts with our staffing and contract needs. I did want to give you that kind of overall level of vacancy. Here on slide 6 is a lot of the same information that Dayton just presented, so I won't belabor it too much, but we're trying to give you a little bit of the history of contract staffing on both of the campuses. The campuses have used supplemental nursing staffing over time as a pretty standard way in most healthcare settings to fill in gaps in shifts. With the COVID pandemic and loss of positions and just trying to keep the bed capacity open where it was without making reductions, agency staffing or hiring contract nurses and direct care staff became the way we could keep those beds open. So you can see what impact that had on spending. The one thing we've got on this chart that Dayton, I don't think Dayton had, was the number of contract staff that actually represents. So on the first part of the graph in 2024, as Dayton mentioned, we spent at Larned $41.3 million on contract staffing, and that represented an average of about 220 contract nurses or direct care staff each month. At Osawatomie in 2024, we spent $17.9 million or almost $18 million, and that was for about 100 positions, 100 contract nurses that came and worked. Maybe the other point that I tried to make on slide number 6 was kind of what we've spent so far. So through the end of December, we've already spent at Larned $22.7 million on contract staffing. We don't stop using them. We keep those contracts flowing so we can keep beds open and serving patients. What we've been doing the last several years is coming to the governor in the budget process and the legislature and really asking for kind of just-in-time funding to fund what our need is for the current fiscal year that we're in, halfway through. So that's the request that you've got in front of you today, or the governor did, the House has, and now you all are reviewing it as well. Just a couple of other things that this isn't a new issue for us, and it isn't a new issue for you. Last year, the House Appropriations Committee in particular formed a subcommittee to focus on this issue and spent 2 or 3 days focused on the contract nursing issue across the healthcare sector and spent some focused amount of time with us as the state hospitals. One of the things that came out of that as recommendations from the agency of how to address the amount of spending and trying to stop at least stop the increase or reverse the trend, was we suggested increasing the limit on state employee bonuses and then using some targeted bonuses to encourage recruiting, retention of state employees in those positions, and then encouraging folks to work shifts where we really needed the help. So, and the committee recommended those things and included as a budget proviso in your budget bill last year, they gave KDADs across the state hospital system some flexibility to raise the cap on state employee bonuses from $3,500 to $10,000, and they gave us some direction on how to use that. So the next couple of slides show you what bonuses we implemented. We did a sign-on bonus, a referral bonus, a couple of retention bonuses when an employee is hired, that's the sign-on bonus. If they stay through the first 6 months without disciplinary action, there's another bonus. And if they stay through the first 12 months, there's a third bonus. So a new employee can earn up to $3,000 in bonuses through that mechanism. We found in looking at the data with retention in particular that our key drop points where we would lose people, if we could get them hired, we lost a pretty good share at 6 months, and we lost the next tier at a year. So those are why we targeted those kind of critical dates to say, stay with us through that 6 months when you're on the job, you've learned it, you've seen what the difficulties are, let us get to the next phase, and then after a year, if we can keep somebody a year, we have pretty good success at retaining them over the long term. The other bonus that has really made a difference, and the superintendents can talk more about this, is the pickup shift bonus. So if an employee wants to pick up a shift that the superintendent has identified as a critical need, they can earn an extra $100 for taking that shift. And we found that's really helped help us fill shifts that need additional staffing, but also targeting people to overtime shifts where we really need it as opposed to them determining that on their own. So the last slide, or maybe next to last slide that I'm going to present, is kind of the overall look at what those bonuses of what we've paid out. We started doing this in July 21st with the new fiscal year, and this was through a couple of weeks ago, January 18th. Just the pickup shift bonus for a full shift, that's 3,200 individuals or 3,200 shifts have received that bonus for a total of $323,000. We've really seen that make a difference in our ability to fill critical shifts, not rely on the agency to, so if one of our employees isn't taking an overtime shift, we're passing that on to the agency staff at a much higher cost than it is for our employee to work that overtime shift. Again, the superintendents can talk some more about that. But so all of those bonuses were recommendations that came out of that study committee last year. We think we're showing, and the superintendents will talk about it. I keep saying that. I should let them just come up and talk. That it's really having an impact, particularly at Osawatomie and Parsons State Hospital. So we appreciate that flexibility and think, again, a couple more months, we'll have even more of a story to tell. But that is something we would look to the legislature again to renew that authority for for fiscal year 2026 as well. Mr. Chairman, the last couple of things I had just was what we've asked for in the budget, and I think Dayton's already covered this. So for Larned State Hospital, in the governor's budget, we requested $32.7 million from the state general fund in the current fiscal year, fiscal 2025, and the same in fiscal 2026. And again, they've already explained that represents the difference between what we think we're going to spend, which is $43.8 million, what we already had in the approved budget, the reappropriation that we carried forward at Larned from fiscal 24 into 25, and then the gap. And the gap for us was $32.7 million. At Osawatomie, the same kind of calculation. We've been projecting our expenditures for agency staffing, figured out what we've already got in the approved budget. They didn't have a reappropriation, but the difference there was $11 million, and that's what we asked the governor to include in her budget. She did include those requests in her budget as she submitted it in January. And then Dayton's already, and Dylan as well, explained with the House Appropriations Committee where they are not fulfilling the full governor's recommendation, but giving us a little bit of breathing room with those costs. I'm happy to answer questions, but if, and happy to do that now, but I think with the superintendents here, I think they can provide some more context about what they've been doing to actively, this is what they do every day, the numbers that they're looking at every day, and would probably provide some more context. But if there's a question I could answer, I'd be happy to do that right now.
I think you're right. I think we'll wait till we let them talk and then we'll do questions for all three.
So I'd like to bring up Dr. Lindsay Dinkle. She's the superintendent at Larned, and have her take the presentation from here. And then Ashley Byram's the superintendent at Osawatomie, and she's got a few, asked them to present similar kinds of information for both campuses, but then they'll be happy to answer questions as well.
Thank you, Scott. Next, we'll have Ashley Byram. Pardon me? Oh, to go segment, okay. Lindsay Dinkle, Superintendent of Larned State Hospital. Lindsay, welcome committee.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, committee members. All right, slide 13 as well. I will start talking about the contract nursing staff specific to Larned State Hospital. As has kind of been discussed and you're likely aware of, hiring out in the central, western, rural parts of Kansas can certainly be a challenge. And so that is why we have had to turn to contract nursing in order to supplement the deficiencies we have with our FTE. And so this particular slide gives you an example of the starting rates that we pay for our FTEs in comparison to the average rate in which we pay to the contracts for the nursing staff. So again, the very right column is not what we're paying directly to those agency contract nurses. That's what goes to their contractor, and then they handle that from there. So when D of A had re-sent out bids for contract nursing and had some new contracts awarded here recently, LSH decided to kind of set a stance on the limits in what we are willing to spend on the contract nursing staff in order to try to bring some of those costs down. Previously, we were really trying to work with any contract nursing entity that could help get us individuals out to our hospital and provide those services, but we're trying to take the reins a little bit stronger and set those limits. And so you'll see in that very right column, that is essentially the max amount that we're willing to pay and work with the contract nursing entities that we have opportunities to work with through what was awarded with D of A. We have just recently here, we have a couple of contract nursing entities that we do have about 45 staff on our campus right now that are rates higher. And recently we've made the decision that we are going to no longer renew with those, and we're going to shift back to that expectation of what we said of not paying more than this rate here. So that is going to take an adjustment of us losing and replacing with some other either FTEs that we can bring on or contract nursing staff. So I wanted to highlight that for you. And just to kind of give you an idea, another slide had mentioned it, but we're sitting at about 237 contract staff, nursing staff, helping us run the facility right now in comparison to around 155 staff through FTEs. And I'll show you in these next slides here what that basically provides us as far as the care. Something I want to also expand on from slide 14 is not only do we have geographical limitations with being out in a more rural part of the state, but we're also not working with just any type of psychiatric patient or resident. We are working with individuals that have a little bit higher mental health needs. So individuals who have a history of verbal, physical aggression, individuals who engage in manipulative type behaviors, individuals going through active psychosis, so they're experiencing hallucinations, delusions, having thoughts of wanting to harm themselves, harm others. It's a very unique type of population that not just anyone is able or willing to work with. And so that's another challenge of the LSH setting, is the fact that we have those types of clients out there and trying to find staff that are able to work with them. Something that has also really challenged us as far as having to meet the daily needs of our patients and residents is the fact that they have some of those unique needs, such as the aggression, high medical needs, being a fall risk, wanting to harm themselves or harm others. Those types of patients or residents often require a one-to-one assignment with a staff to keep them safe. So if an individual is assigned one-to-one, that individual has to be within arm's reach of them at all times for safety needs. You'll see on this slide 14 that the average when we put this together was at 27. Lately here, the last couple weeks here, we've been higher at around 30 individuals on our campus that are one-to-one. So if you think about that, in comparison to 3 shifts that it takes to cover a 24-hour day, that's 90 additional people we need to cover direct care. And that doesn't even begin to talk about just the client or the staff that are on the units just providing standard care to the unit. So that's something I wanted to point out too, because that increases the demand that we have to have for direct care staff. One shout out that I do want to give for what the contract nursing has been able to do for the FTEs of Larned is being able to greatly reduce the mandates in which we had. Several years ago, the mandates were through the roof. There were several department heads, administrators, including myself on the phone begging people to come in and help us cover direct care spots so that we could get some of our patients off of lockdown or so that we can continue to provide just that standard care. And so thankfully, because we've been able to incorporate contract nursing staff more into that mix, we are able to function a little bit better and our FTE positions are able to have more of a life. You'll see on this table here, this is the average number of nursing FTE mandates per day. And so again, keep in mind we have 3 shifts in a day to cover that 24-hour period. So for example, January was a little high, but on an average day, we had 7 people for that whole day that we had to mandate FTE-wise to work additional more than 8 hours. But if you look at, there's a few months where you see either 0 or you see less than 1. 0 means we literally had no staff members that were mandated for that entire month, every single day, all 3 shifts for those days. Less than 1 means we had or very infrequent mandates that it didn't even add up to even 1 person being mandated per day. So as a result, that is definitely allowed to have more of a work-life balance for our FTEs. They're able to go home when they're supposed to go home. They're not having to completely change up their lives to be at the mercy of what LSH needs them to help keep these patients and residents cared for. Another thing we've seen is just the adaptation of our FTEs of knowing how to work 8 12-hour shifts or pick up those shifts with the pickup bonuses so that they can get some hours in but still go home with that. So I do want to highlight that despite the scary dollar amount, we have been able to give some of our FTEs their life back a little bit. And so also adding in, again, trying to not to throw too many numbers at you, but when you think about the coverage that we need on a day-to-day basis right now, we need around 27 RNs, 26 LPNs, and 246 MHEDs or direct care staff a day to keep our patients and residents safe and operations to function. That adds up to 299 staff a day to help run that. So that's what those dollar amounts are paying for, is all those bodies to help us. Of course, when staff have to go in and work the overtime, that's where we're able to knock down some of those. But if you're just looking at 8-hour shifts with the way that we schedule, 299 people a day are needed just for direct care. Going into slide 15, this is where you'll see on the second bullet point, I just want to highlight kind of what Mr. Bruner had mentioned, the vacancy rates, what they look like right now without the nursing contract staff included in it. So sitting in the 60s and then about 47% for that direct care techs. On the left-hand side is kind of ideally what we would want to hit and able to effectively run the hospital through FTE positions. On the right side is an actual snapshot of January 7th is the date that we chose for this presentation here when we put it together. That shows you the actual numbers of what we're working with. So you'll see how many staff, and that's total. We have 9 FTEs RN right now for direct care. That's all we have. 9.5 for LPNs, and then of course the MHEDs. The second column next to it, that is how many at that day in time, how many contract nursing staff we had to help supplement, and then you'll see the totals. And so as you'll see with the totals on that right-hand table, we're still short to the left-hand table of what we ideally need to optimally run the hospital, and that's where we have to depend on the overtime and extra shifts being picked up to keep everything covered. I want to step back now and just talk a little bit bigger picture about LSH and the recruiting and retention aspect, kind of away from the contract nursing in particular. Last year, our human resources department and our department heads, we processed through 538 applications, and 158 of those individuals were hired. And so some of the common reasons of why people were not hired as FTEs were listed out there. I kind of put percentages together with some of the main reasons. We had about 36% of that group of individuals were not hired just because they weren't selected. And that means that even if there was like one position available and 5 people applied, 4 people would have been considered not selected. So that makes that number a little bit higher there. 31%, 165 individuals just didn't show up for interviews or didn't show up for orientation. And then we had a fairly decent chunk of no tax clearance, about 7%, 11% declined positions. So those are kind of the rationales of why people are not coming on as FTEs. And so down below, I also wanted to point out just the trend the last few years of what we've been able to bring on for FTEs. And as you can see, although it doesn't always feel like it, we did show an increase in several positions and being able to bring more on. So this last calendar year here, we were able to jump up on MSHDs and bring in 74 versus the prior years. We also had a really nice jump up in RNs and being able to bring them on to the campus. I kind of noticed that the security was a little bit of a dip, but I went and dug a little further in. Of the 22, we interviewed 29 individuals for security positions in 2024. So hiring 22 out of the 29 really wasn't too bad of an outcome there. So in total, 158 individuals were hired, like I said, for FTE, which is an increase from prior years. I'm not going to focus on 17 too much because I want to jump over to this 18 piece here. And actually, before I even get into that, I'm going to make note of just the end of service piece, which is not so much directly hit in your presentation, more what I'm going to give you verbally. Just to give you an idea, again, 158 is what we brought in. 143 is the number of FTEs that we lost for 2024. So we actually hired more than what we lost. The percentage of people that left rationales, we had about 30 or 25% of our individuals were dismissed from employment. We had 45% of them resigned. And then our third highest reason of why people left were retirement. We had 15 people retire from the state last year from LSH, which was exciting news there. So I did want to point out that we did bring in quite a bit of individuals and brought in more than what we lost. Now focusing on 18, this kind of shows the breakdown of numbers for LSH and what Mr. Brunner had described. The piece I want to focus the most on here is the second bulletin point, where you see our overall vacancy rate from the start of June in 2024 went from 45% down, and actually as of this month, it's down to 35%. So we saw a 10% decrease in our vacancy after towards the latter part of 2024, and I give a lot of credit to the various bonuses that Mr. Brunner described to you guys, and being able to recruit people and also retain them through those sign-on bonuses, the referral bonuses, longevity, the pickup shift money. That has made a huge difference with that. We have about a 30 FTE difference in MHEDs and what we normally have in that department. So that's quite a bit of individuals that we didn't have prior to this. And so this bonus piece has been a real blessing, both number-wise, and also I have to speak to just morale. We still have, of course, the standard challenges any organization of our size does, but we've definitely seen a lot better headspace that our employees have been in these recent years, and a lot of very happy faces when the retention bonus paid out the payday before Christmas. So I felt like I was Santa Claus a little bit that day, so I took a little credit for that. Sorry, guys. Okay. And then just the last piece I wanted to note, tying into retention, you guys can obviously browse through those, but something that I wanted to specifically discuss was just some of our flexible work arrangements and our training and skill development. Last week, Friday, we had Senator Clifford visit our campus, and he met with several of our direct care staff, and something that they articulated that really stood out and clicked to me with what we kind of promote and talk about is how much staff appreciated the flexibility that we provide with them and allowing them to not only be primarily focused on the state government work that they do, but allow them to be also involved in other things such as going back to school and furthering their education or being able to be a part of communities, different meetings or boards or things that are going on in the community, being able to coach at our schools for the community and those types of things. And so we were really excited, I was excited at least, to hear some of that feedback that our staff are appreciative of how much we're trying to work with them to keep them happy with us and also contribute in other ways and advance themselves in their lives. Additionally, the one thing I wanted to also expand on was the training and skill development piece has been a really big thing. So we had several staff comment about how much they appreciate growth opportunities that exist out there. A lot of our staff that are FTEs have been around or from that area, and so it's neat for them to be able to see the different positions and roles grow, and they can go after that stuff, and they can go and receive additional supervisory training and other supports to help them be able to progress professionally. So that was something that I think is very exciting and worth noting as a retention piece. So with that, that concludes the LSH piece, and so I believe we'll hand it over to Ashley Byram for a little bit of Osawatomie.
Thank you. Ashley? Welcome, committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Ashley Byram. I'm the superintendent at Osawatomie State Hospital. Osawatomie has been around for 158 years. We serve currently 45 different counties in Kansas and other states. We have 3 separate entities: Osawatomie State Hospital, Adair Acute Care, and our Michael House, which is part of the residential facility for the SPTP program. So Osawatomie State Hospital is licensed for 116 beds through Kansas Department of Health and Environment. As of today, we have 110 patients at Osawatomie. We do have semi-private rooms, so therefore sometimes patients do require a private room. So that does take up a bed available for another individual. We serve voluntary individuals as well as civilly committed patients, criminal court commitments, dual commitments. And we have 4 distinctive units at Osawatomie, each with its own program. So for Adair Acute Care, which is our certified hospital through CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, we have 43 certified beds. As of today, we have 41 individuals. And we have some open beds, which we will be admitting those individuals today, so the other 2 beds have already been spoken for. We serve voluntary as well as civilly committed patients. We also have 3 social detox beds available to the community. With recent renovations, all our rooms now are private, which has decreased a lot in the acuity of that unit. So I believe in your packet you have 2 different slides for this. This one that's up here is the most current and accurate slide, as it has both Adair Acute Care and Osawatomie State Hospital on it. So this kind of tells you about the needs for nursing and our direct care staff that we have per day. So for both of our hospitals, we require 48 nurses per day, 20 LMHTs or LPNs, and 96 of our LMHTs. So one thing at Osawatomie that we've really been focusing is to decrease those contract nursing costs. Our chief nursing officers have really been focusing on, okay, why is it that staff don't want to roll over to become state employees? So we were looking at different ways. So one thing that Dr. Superintendent Dinkle mentioned earlier was about the bonuses. So the bonuses, we did see a huge decrease with our contract nursing as we were able to bring on more employees. But this graph really shows it, I feel, because if you can see, the weekly average amount for contract nursing prior to implementation of those bonuses was $355,000 a week. Since those implementation of those bonuses, it has decreased to $277,000 per week. So we went from having an average of 108 to 103 contract agency to about 82 in December. And we continue to be able to bring on new hires, a lot we feel due to having those bonuses. A lot of the different recruiting things we've been doing with our HR department is doing a lot of different career fairs. We've started high school tours, especially with the seniors, to explain what different disciplines we have at the hospital, what different departments do. We've become more involved in our community to get our name out there more in a positive light. Again, we use several different platforms to advertise. One thing that we do really focus on is our nursing clinicals. So Osawatomie State Hospital does still provide nursing clinicals. We currently have contract with 5 different universities, including Fort Scott Community College, Franklin Technology College, Galen College of Nursing, Neosho County Community College, and Rasmussen. So in 2024, we had 156 nursing students that came through the nursing clinicals program. And with that, we were able to recruit some of those nursing students right when they were coming out of their program. We also do practicums and internships for social work and also for our psychology students. We recently hired on a master's level clinician for clinical therapy. This also is another slide that Superintendent Dinkle mentioned as well in regards to the different pickup bonuses that we have. So if an individual picks up an extra bonus that we deem critical, then they do receive $100. This has really been a morale booster, and we have been able to see more state employees pick up those overtime shifts because of that bonus. Therefore, that decreases our agency overtime costs. Some other things that we've been doing for retention is we really focus on employee appreciation. We have an employee appreciation committee at the hospital that focuses solely on doing activities for the staff, such as food trucks, t-shirt designs, chili cook-offs to make the environment more friendly. We also have been celebrating our employees through various initiatives, such as Power of Positive, recognizing employee for going above and beyond for something they did, Employee of the Quarter, and also, again, service awards. Recently, we had 3 individuals who recently received 40 years of state service. Again, focusing on employee training, not only for our direct care staff, but also for our supervisors and directors. Continue education and really focusing on our nursing department. That is one thing that my chief nursing officer did find out when some nursing staff would leave. It was, okay, why did you want to leave the state employment? A lot of it was, well, we didn't feel we got enough training. So then we started introducing some more training outside of regular orientation, so such as training on the floor in the moment so that we can be there and support our nursing staff. Again, focusing on communication for the entire hospital as well. So as an agency, really focus on what works for one hospital might work for another hospital. So a lot of times we're talking and brainstorming about different ideas between Larned State Hospital and Osawatomie. So some things that we really are looking at is cross-state training different staff to assist. We have what we call non-nursing volunteers. So if an individual that might not be a mental health tech, but they want to pick up those shifts, they can on their off hours, such as we have housekeeping that can go pick up shifts as a non-nursing volunteer to help, which also decreases in agency costs. One thing that OSH has done this year, starting in November, we started a pilot project of RN self-scheduling. That is what some of the more private hospitals are doing that we've noticed, is that they can develop their own schedule, which does help with that personal and professional commitments. So we work 12-hour shifts at the state at Osawatomie. So our nurses are able to go and say, okay, I'm going to work 3 12-hour shifts and still be considered a full-time employee and receive all my state benefits. And since we've been doing this in November, we have not been able to see a gap in coverage with our state employees. So that has been really something that has assisted us in that. So some recommendations to what we've been talking about to control contract costs. We really feel that maintaining that cap of $10,000 per employee for the agency would be most beneficial. As you can see through the graphs that both Superintendent Dinkle and I presented, you will see that that has helped with those bonus shifts. So keeping that at the $10,000 cap. Also continuing with maintaining competitive wages with other healthcare and 24/7 facilities. That is not the only reason why people leave businesses is due to the income, but that is a huge thing that people want to. If I'm working alongside somebody that's making 2 to 3 times more than me, that's hard to take as an employee. So continuing those cost of living and market adjustments. We've also talked about creating a nursing education incentive program, tuition reimbursements, scholarship funds. One thing that we do at the hospital that Superintendent Dingle talked about is adjusting people's work schedule if possible so that they can attend school and to improve their education. We've also thought about, as an organization, about service commitment agreements. Okay, so we're gonna help you work with going to school for a year, right? Well, then let's have you sign an agreement so that you would have to provide state service for another year after that. We have seen it where sometimes we work with someone on their schedule and then they leave right after they graduate. So we lose that piece. And just funding some education for our nursing as well so they can continue their education and receive those educational opportunities that are more expensive. So with that, we'll stay on for questions.
Thank you, Ashley. Questions? Senator Fagg?
How'd you know I'd have a question?
Well, I always do.
First of all, I want to tell you, thank you, all of you, for what you do. You know, that thing, this retention, employee appreciation, employee training, communications, I like what you're trying to do with that. So I want to pat you all on the back for that. The thing, when I look at this graph, you go along in 2019, 5.9, goes up to 8.7, and then COVID hits, it looks like. So it goes to 43, and then we go along and what the agency's requesting, the governor's saying 32.6, and then we're at 11.1. So I guess as we look to the future, if somebody's really off on what's going to happen here, or trying to understand if we went with the lower side, if somebody's wrong, how does that get covered? That's one of my questions that somebody might try to address.
Scott Bruner with KDADS. So we've had 2 or 3 years where we've done kind of just-in-time budgeting. So we use the governor's budget process and we estimate what we think we're going to spend in the current fiscal year, and that's what we ask for as a supplemental to add to our current budget. We've asked for enhancements in the budget year cycle as well. This is the first year that I can recall in the last couple where the governor's actually funded that enhancement request, which when we got that in January, it was a relief to us because that lets us plan, lets us kind of project forward. If we don't spend all of it, we'll certainly give it back. That wasn't probably what you expected to hear, but we only want to spend what we need to keep operations going. So I think we would anticipate that I don't know that we'll be back to a $40 million figure at Larned, or we'll be at 35 million, but I think we're on the downhill side. And Osawatomie, I think, is how we have some confidence in that, because we've actually seen their growth wasn't as fast, but with the bonus and the extra recruiting effort, we've seen that turn. The issue with Larned is just the scale so much larger, and try to think about and the incredible work that Dr. Dinkle and her team have done to recruit people. That's a net of 50. And you're talking about there's 250 contractors on the campus. That's going to take us 4 years to reverse. So I don't think it's a one-year fix. I do think we're on the bonuses are making a difference, and we just need to continue playing that out to see how what the impact is over time. But our budget cycle, we've been comfortable in asking for what we need, and we've been really close in our projections. But having some additional flexibility would let us do more planning going forward. So I think that what the House has done is a good chunk of what we asked for. Funding in 2026 for Osawatomie is extremely helpful for our planning purposes. Having some flexibility in Larned's budget for 2026 would certainly help us as well.
Thank you. This one kind of goes back to Larned. What's the average age of the staff in Larned? I get concerned about if you've got some older people and you're going to have a bunch. Just wondering if you know, and then also how many of the nurses have children and that kind of thing. trying to understand the picture of where we're at with that.
I gave you a lot of numbers about Lawrence State Hospital, but as far as Lawrence itself, I'd have to look into that information for you as far as the average age. I do know it is an older community. You're referring to the city, the town.
Just the hospital.
Staff? Okay. I don't have that either. I don't. I will hire anyone who qualifies and will work with me. But I'd have to look into the average age of the staff.
Just to understand what we got to look forward to in the future. I'd be interested in that. And how many have children, and, you know, when you get these contracts, where do they live? You get into this quality of life thing, so housing and daycares, just to see how we address that kind of thing, because we would prefer not to have the contract nurses, so.
Sure. And that's something I didn't emphasize as much with you all as I did when I presented to the House, was housing is a very real challenge in the Larned and surrounding communities. We just don't have a lot of availability for some of those staff to come in. And unfortunately, we also have landlords that take advantage of the situation with some of our traveling nursing staff that come in. It's not surprising that sometimes we'll have nursing contract staff come out by us and then choose to extend. And then before you know it, their children or their family have come out as well. We have several individuals I can think of specifically that their families have kind of joined our community because they do continue to renew with us contract after contract after contract, so they do become part of the community. So it does happen.
Senator Petty.
Scott, one of the superintendents, either one. So I'm not sure if this is, whether you get this or if there enough time has passed to be able to show this, but are you able to show yet savings with the bonuses saving on contract nursing?
I don't know that we can show direct savings for Osawatomie, where they've actually bent the curve on how much you're spending week to week. As that piles up, or we stay at that lower level, we'll see it there. And at K&I as well, we've seen it more there. Not so much at Larned, but I think on the other two campuses, we could, for the amount of money that we're spending on bonuses, the savings on the contract side, I haven't actually done the math, but I think we could show it there. Larned, I think the question's still, or the picture's a little more cloudy.
I mean, we're hearing, positives in those numbers. But it does kind of beg the question whether those incentives to keep someone as a state, or have some become a state employee and keep them, if that's helping to reduce that overall cost with contract nursing. And then the other question I have is, do you see a big move, or have you seen a big move from someone being a state employee and then going to contracting?
I'll look to Ashley and Lindsay, but we've not, maybe 3 years ago, we did lose some state staff to the contractors, but that hasn't been the case over the last couple of years, and they may have some examples.
Ashley Byron, Osawatomie State Hospital. One thing that we've actually been seeing is we've actually been seeing contract agencies coming over to state. You're right, Senator Petty. At the beginning, it was that we would see state staff working along contract, finding out how much they're getting paid, and they would jump over to contract. We're seeing it the other way around right now.
And so just as a follow-up, so do you see that? I mean, I know there's a lot of things that go into that, but do you see, in the things like you've talked about, morale, the working environment, the bonuses and the incentives, do you see those as being a positive towards keeping that?
Yes, I do see that as a positive, especially with the market value raises that we had last year as well. So we were able really to transfer a lot of RNs over to state employees because it closed that gap between what the contract agency were paying their nurses to what we were paying. Because then we were also able to offer retirement and healthcare, even though a lot of those contract agency companies have now started to provide those as well. We're still able to encourage some of them to roll over, but also we have, the PTO time that we offer as well.
I thought that's the incentives you're talking about, looking at the market and what other hospitals do as far as planning out their own schedules and stuff makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
for positives to keep people in, working in either Larned or Osawatomie.
That was one thing that my chief nursing officer, she'd worked at some other private facilities, and that's one thing that she brought with her and really encouraged us to look at that, and we have seen improvement with that.
Thank you.
Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at, let's just look at Larned, for instance. You have 896 FTEs, but you say you're about 35% vacant. That would mean about 300 are vacant up there. Then you're making that up with contract employees. And at Larned, if I look, and maybe I didn't do the math right, but I hope I didn't, it looks like the average wages paid at Larned for a contract employee is $190,000. Based on the numbers that was in this, I just divided the number. And then at Osawatomie, you have about 540 some with 160 vacant, and your average contract is $168,000 a year for the contract employees. It seems like to me if we would offer more money for the, if you could get them, offer more money for your staff, let's staff it right, but having a third vacant is not going to work, and you're staffing it with that. I'm struggling with why are we losing a staff?
Thank you for the question or the observation. So the $90 for Larned, the number that Lindsay had there, that $90 is what we're paying to the contract agency, and they're hiring an RN, and they're paying them something. They're taking some off that off the top of that $90 for their operations. So the RN's getting less than that. But I think we're pretty confident they're getting paid more per hour than the $40 an hour where we start a registered nurse. So I'm not going to disagree with you. If we paid, if our base rate was higher for nurses, for LPNs, for our direct care staff, we would probably have more. We would hire more. The governor, the legislature over the last 4 years has been extremely generous in letting us and authorizing us to raise wages and funding those increases. So I feel like we're in a very competitive market, but I think we're in a very competitive place. The bonuses are a good way to, without saying forever, we're going to go to $45 an hour. It lets us say, let's supplement that at the decision point of, do I accept this job or not? And then play that out over time. But I do think we need to keep looking at the market rates. And for Larned in particular, it's just a different environment. To find people with the requisite licenses and skills and aptitude and abilities. Maybe there's a regional differential. The House committees talked about that some too. Maybe we need to do something like that. But again, I think I don't want to leave you with the impression that our contract nurses are making $90 an hour. They're making less than that. But that's what it costs us. Yes. And to Senator Petty's question, that's the differential. If we can hire an RN at 40 instead of paying $90 an hour, that's $50 an hour. We can work with some of that's going to bonuses and other things. But so again, every one of those that we don't use an agency nurse, but we hire a state employee, we ought to be saving $50 an hour in that flip. I should add up the total of where we are, but I just haven't done that yet. But thank you,
Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This report is filled with things that are discouraging, distressing to me, probably to the agency as well. I'm going to ask a couple questions. Both of them you're not going to want to answer, potentially. But Deputy Secretary Bruner, you're the one standing in front of us. If you were king for a day, how would you remedy this solution? Number two question. If we had these hospitals, I'm thinking particularly of Larned, because it seems to be the most expensive, at a different location in the state of Kansas, I don't know where, Sedgwick County, Butler County, wherever, would that, in your opinion, make a difference? And I know these are tough questions, but we've got to come up with some kind of answer. We can't continue doing this.
I may come back to the king for a day question and do the other locations first. So we're building a new psychiatric hospital in South Wichita that's going to be of a similar size as Osawatomie. And we'll see whether we can recruit 250 to 300 staff to fill to fill what we need there to open in January 2027. Part of the argument to build that facility in Sedgwick County was where there was an identified need and where there was a larger population base. And I do think where there's also training programs, Wichita State, the osteopath school, the biomed campus, lots of things going on in Sedgwick County and in the region to promote healthcare employment and training, and we'll see if we benefit from that. So I'll have a better picture in 2 years than that. If we were recruiting since we do have campuses in other places, here in Topeka at KNI, it's different than a mental health hospital, but we are pretty successful in recruiting direct care staff that would otherwise be maybe working in a nursing home as a CNA, but we have a hard time with nurses. If we had a facility located in Johnson County, I mean, they're larger population base, but more competition. So I really don't know, but I do think we do think there is a regional element at Larned because of the rural nature of it and just the population base that we need to do something different there, or we're not going to be able to get away from this kind of cycle. Although I think we're on the right side of it. King for a day. The action doesn't just last a day. Maybe caveat my answer with that. So I think I would keep the bonuses and maybe do more at the sign-on level, just to make that first decision for state employment more attractive. I'd probably put all these people in CAPERS 1 or 2 as opposed to CAPERS 3, just because we're in an environment. You didn't say I had to explain any of them, so I'll just maybe leave it at CAPERS 1. And then I think that the training, the scholarships, I think growing our own is really important. There are, I'm not saying there's nobody that lives in Larned or Pawnee County. There are lots of people who live there. I think if we had a pipeline to show kids in middle school in that area that there's a path to becoming a nurse manager or a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and we help fund that pipeline for those students, I think people would want to stay in their community or come back after they're trained. So I do think a focused training effort would help us, but that's a much longer term solution. So I think the one King for a day would probably be the CAPERS thing, and then base pay and sign-on bonuses at a higher level. Thank you for the question. I didn't mean to be flippant about it. Those are where I think I would invest, given what I've seen. That's where I would invest the state's resources.
Thank you, Scott. A couple of things. Committee, thank you. And this is information as you look at it. If you got questions, we'll address this, later when we get on to the budget. But I wanted to kind of fill in up front here with some of the issues, because I agree with Senator Peck. We can't continue to spend $59 million on traveling nurses. And I think some of the things that we've implemented the last couple of years look to me like they're helping. I think the bonuses, and I think, I think it's paying more than it is CAPERS, just me, because I think a lot of young people nowadays, when you talk to them, they're not worried about retirement, and they don't want to stay anywhere 2-3 years, and they want to move on. I mean, it's what we're dealing with. So I think that, paying more upfront would save us a lot on the back end, and I think you showed that at Osawatomie with, adding extra shifts and less traveling nurses. But I'll give you one piece of information, because you talked about, pipelines. Fort Hays has got over 400 nurses currently on campus at Fort Hays studying to be nurses. And I know a lot of the other nursing programs, I think Emporia's up. I know there's several others that a lot of people are getting into nursing. So maybe that'll help a little too, but I think immediately we need to try to figure out this $59 million. So with that, committee, thank you, and we are adjourned.